Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Views of an Outsider, the Outsider's View from April 13th. Let's start with the big story of the week. In the 48 hours that followed Trump's announcement of his Liberation Day tariffs, more than $6 trillion was wiped off the stock market. The Dow Jones saw its worst 48 hours since the COVID lockdowns in 2020, plunging more than 3,900 points, while the S&P 500 fell another 6% last Friday, when 486 out of its 500 stocks lost value. In the big picture, the S&P landed down 17% from February, and the Dow down 14%. J.P. Morgan said that there was a 60% chance of a global recession by the end of the year over disruptive U.S. policies. Some countries dug in for a prolonged trade war. China, for instance, slapped another 34% tariff on all American imports, while the EU said it would pursue countermeasures. But many other countries came to the negotiating table. Taiwan, for example, said it would not implement retaliatory tariffs, but would instead pursue striking a zero tariff deal with the United States. Vietnam, one of the United States' largest trade partners in Asia, sent a letter to Trump on Saturday offering to remove all tariffs on U.S. imports if Trump would agree to pause his tariffs for 45 days. The United Kingdom also hinted at major concessions, saying it was preparing an offer to lower tariffs and reduce tax rates on American companies operating within its borders. More than 70 countries reached out to the president seeking to negotiate. In other economic news, according to reports from DOGE, nearly 4 million non-citizens were issued Social Security numbers during Joe Biden's time at the White House. Stuart Varney showed how the numbers exploded from 270,425 in Biden's first year in office to 2,095,247 instances of this fraud by his last year as president. An official at DOGE, who is also an equity firm CEO, Antonio Gracias, reported that more than 1 million immigrants who were released into the country with a notice to appear in immigration court, dates that were scheduled an average of 6 years later, are currently receiving taxpayer-funded Medicaid, and thousands of them were found illegally listed on our voter registration rolls. Gracias appeared on the All In podcast where he said, "So now you're in the country with some quasi-legal status, you're waiting for your court date, you can fill out an asylum application. Once that application is in, you can file another form, a 765 to get work authorization. Once you get that, you get a 766, which is the authorization, and we automatically send you a Social Security card in the mail." With access to Social Security cards, Gracias says over 1 million immigrants have been able to receive Medicaid benefits. Quote, "We mapped this through the benefit programs. We found every benefits program that is being accessed by these people. 1.3 million are on Medicaid right now, today." He went on to explain that thousands of migrants have been found on voter registration rolls as well, asserting that the Democrat Party deliberately opened the borders in order to import these new voters, saying, quote, "We looked at voter rolls and we found that thousands are registered to vote in friendly states. And we looked even further in those friendly states and found that many of those people had actually voted. It was shocking to us. I think this was a move to import voters. This doesn't include the 7.8 million that ICE has that have come in illegally that we know are here, and all the people who are here illegally who we don't know are here." He pointed to California, which used to regularly vote for Republican governors and presidential candidates before becoming a uniparty, solidly blue state after Ronald Reagan's amnesty for illegal aliens went into effect, the one truly damaging mistake that Reagan did make. Gracias said, "Go look at California. Richard Nixon Ronald Reagan came from California. Ronald Reagan signed amnesty, and some 40 years later, it is now a solidly blue state. I don't know what the unintended consequences will be long term, but I can tell you it's already happened in America, where an amnesty program actually turned a very large state from one party to another. End quote. Yeah, I wonder why Democrats keep opposing voter ID to ensure that only citizens end up voting, since they are the only people constitutionally allowed to do so. That's a big mystery. When it comes to sorting out other political knots in the system, on Monday, the Supreme Court affirmed that the Trump administration has the right to use the Alien Enemies Act from 1798 to deport illegal immigrant gang members out of the United States. According to the New York Times, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that the current use of this act is valid. All of the conservative judges, except Amy Coney Barrett, ruled that way to form the majority. Barrett partially dissented, along with all of the court's 3 liberal judges who dissented in lockstep. This ruling, which has now been issued from the highest court in the land, reverses the ruling that came from the overreaching district judge, James Boasberg, who was grossly abusing his very limited local authority by attempting to issue orders outside of his jurisdiction on a national scale. Boasberg had temporarily blocked the use of the Alien Enemies Act when it came to a case involving 5 Venezuelan nationals, which was his right, but he overstepped when he extended that local stay concerning a specific case involving those specific people to everyone else who may be affected by the policy all over the country, all of which are beyond his authority. And for that abuse of power, the power that he was entrusted with by the people who retained custody of said power of the state, even after delegating its use to officials, he should be stripped of the right to wield any more power based on the unfitness to do so that he has displayed concerning his judgment and petty disrespect for the fact that said power is not his personal toy to use for his personal causes. That is how the people can put an end to these rampant abuses that are regularly being committed by those in power, by following through on consequences for betraying our trust and forgetting that you serve rather than rule us. And to be clear, I'm not talking about punishing judge for issuing unpopular rulings, but yes, for blatantly invalid power grabs that are born out of an elitist spirit willing to resort to the tyrannical. That needs to be answered for to the people who trusted you to act in their interest in the pursuit of blind justice, according to the precedents of the law, not to act based on representing yourself in the pursuit of your own personal beliefs. In more legal news, the next day the Supreme Court ruled in the current administration's favor again, this time in a 7-2 decision that officially blocked Judge William Alsup, who had attempted to force the Trump administration to rehire thousands of federal workers that had been fired in keeping with the domain of the executive branch. Back in March, the San Francisco judge appointed by Bill Clinton ruled that the federal agencies had to rehire more than 16,000 probationary employees who had been fired by the Trump administration's Office of Personnel Management. Judge Alsup ordered OPM and the Departments of Agriculture, Defense, Energy, Interior, Treasury, and Veterans Affairs to bring back employees immediately. The Trump administration asked the Supreme Court for a stay of Alsup's order, which was granted. The Supreme Court ruled the district court's injunction was based solely on the allegations of the 9 nonprofit organizations plaintiffs in this case. But under established law, those allegations are presently insufficient to support the organization's standing. But a Supreme Court blog explained Although the court put Alsop's order on hold, a different federal judge in Maryland also has issued an order which remains in effect for now that requires the reinstatement of probationary employees at 20 federal agencies who live and work in the 19 states, along with the District of Columbia, that brought the case. So copy and paste everything I just said about rogue judges to this. The executive branch is allowed to fire executive employees. Meanwhile, on the immigration front, the Department of Homeland Security announced that it will fine migrants almost $1,000 a day for each day that they stay in the United States beyond the date of their deportation order. DHS will start enforcing a 1996 law that allows it to impose a fine of $998 per day on migrants for every day that they stay past the date of their removal order. These penalties will be enforced retroactively for up to 5 years, which would result in maximum fines of more than $1 million for offenders. The government could even seize the assets of migrants who refuse to leave the United States of their own accord after receiving an order of removal. DHS spokesperson Tricia McLaughlin explained that migrants can inform the government of their intent to depart the country via the Customs and Border Patrol Home app, an overhauled version of the infamously abusive CBP-1 app, saying if they don't, they will face the consequences. This includes a fine of $998 per day for every day that the illegal alien overstays their final deportation order. These fines could apply to around 1.4 million illegal aliens who currently have received removal orders. This additional measure is the latest method that the president has put into place to incentivize illegal aliens to voluntarily leave the United States. Immigration experts who recently told the Daily Wire that the Trump administration and his allies in Congress could encourage self-deportation by mandating a national employment verification process called E-Verify, which aims to prevent illegal aliens from illegally obtaining jobs under American employers. Changing the subjects to the advancements being made in the broader world, on Monday, scientists claimed that they have successfully brought back the direwolf species through genetic engineering after it went extinct for 13,000 years. Colossal Biosciences is a Texas-based biotechnology and genetic engineering company. They revealed that 3 direwolf pups were born last fall. The species was popularized through mainstream culture thanks to the popular series Game of Thrones, which is what inspired the company to name the young wolves Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi. Colossal's CEO, Ben Lamb, told the New York Post, "Our team took DNA from a 13,000-year-old tooth and a 72,000-year-old skull and made healthy direwolf puppies. It was once said any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Today, our team gets to unveil some of the magic they are working on and its broader impact on conservation. The company ultimately wants to bring back the woolly mammoth." Now, technically, it sounds to me like these pups are really mutants. They're closer to a man-made hybrid of a gray wolf with some direwolf DNA than a resurrected species, but still, it captures the imagination. However, I saw Jurassic Park, and may I point out that this never ends well for us. First, there's the oohing and the awing, then there's the running and the screaming. Even when we've interfered with endangered species like African elephants, we've ended up endangering rhinos, so clearly we aren't very good at predicting second and third order consequences. So we may want to factor that into these experiments. In other news, on Tuesday, the Justice Department pulled all non-essential federal funding from Maine's Department of Corrections after they continued to house a trans-identifying man in a woman's prison after being warned back in February to stop this practice or face legal action. 26-year-old Andrew Bowser, who was convicted of a double murder, is currently being housed in a women's prison in Maine. The Attorney General, Pam Bondi, said, "We pulled all non-essential funding from the Department of Corrections in Maine because they were allowing a man in a woman's prison, a giant 6'1", 245-pound guy who committed a double murder with a knife, stabbed his parents to death and his family dog, and he identifies as a woman, so they were letting him be housed in a female prison. No longer. We will pull your funding. We will protect women in prison." Maine's Department of Corrections is slated to lose more than $1 million in federal grants as a result of their decision. Meanwhile, the Department of Homeland Security announced that the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services will immediately begin screening immigrants' social media accounts for anti-Semitic content and any history of physically harassing Jews. This follows the administration's deportation efforts concerning foreign students who had their visas revoked for being involved in anti-Semitic campus protests that included illegal acts of vandalism, harassment, and occupying campus buildings. Any information that is found that would indicate that new immigrants have the same intentions may be grounds for denying their request for permanent residency or student visas. And in the screening process, USCIS will consider any social media content that, quote, indicates an alien endorsing, espousing, promoting, or supporting anti-Semitic terrorism, anti-Semitic terrorist organizations, or other anti-Semitic activity as a negative factor in any USCIS discretionary analysis when adjudicating immigration benefits requests. DHS added that it will enforce all immigration laws and protect the United States from terrorist aliens who support anti-Semitic terrorism, violent anti-Semitic ideologies, and various terrorist organizations including Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. Tricia McLaughlin, the DHS Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs, said, "There is no room in the United States for the rest of the world's terrorist sympathizers, and we are under no obligation to admit them or let them stay here. Secretary Noem has made it clear that anyone who thinks that they can come to America and hide behind the First Amendment to advocate for anti-Semitic violence and terrorism, think again. You are not welcome here." I second that. The big news of the week came on Wednesday afternoon when President Trump announced a 90-day pause on his tariffs except for the tariff on China, which the president raised to 125%. The White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, said that the 90-day pause doesn't completely end the Liberation Day tariffs on foreign goods, but rather drops the tariff rate to 10% across the board, which is still a significant increase. This move comes as the Trump administration prepares for trade talks with more than 75 countries. The president said that the change in approach is due in part to the willingness that numerous countries expressed to come to the negotiating table without retaliating against the United States in any way. The stock market saw an immediate spike following Trump's announcement, with the S&P 500 surging 5.7%, the Dow jumping 5%, and the Nasdaq going up nearly 7%. However, Trump hit China with a higher tariff tax, citing a lack of respect that China has shown to the world's markets. He wrote on social media, "At some point, hopefully in the near future, China will realize that the days of ripping off the USA and other countries is no longer sustainable or acceptable." Also on Wednesday, Arkansas's former governor, Mike Huckabee, was confirmed as the U.S. ambassador to Israel in a 53-46 Senate vote that split mostly along party lines, with Pennsylvania's Democrat Senator John Fetterman being the lone Democrat to vote for Huckabee. Unsurprisingly, unjustifiable waste in government spending continues to be exposed. This week, we learned that the federal government has reportedly shelled out $4.6 billion since 2020 for new furniture, during a time when only about half of all federal employees were even showing up in person for work. The Republicans on the House Oversight Committee shared a report from the New York Post detailing the recent testimony of Open the Book CEO John Hart. Hart said, since fiscal year 2021, executive agencies have spent more than $4.6 billion on furniture alone. That amount could buy 9.2 million American families a modest $500 kitchen table. And, of course, workplaces need desks, chairs, and meeting tables. And it's true that beautiful spaces can make us more productive, but beauty at what cost and on whose dime? Hart argued that considering the costs that have been reported, the government has been effectively decorating and redecorating the administrative state. Hart also noted in his opening statement that the State Department had spent more than $1.4 million on, quote, art and drawings to fill the walls of its embassies worldwide, including $200,000 for just 2 paintings by the modern abstract painter Alfred Jensen. Our embassy in Islamabad is a place where you can put your feet up thanks to 40 Ethan Allen chairs, which cost taxpayers $120,000. The New York Post detailed that among the extravagant expenditures being reported was $4 million for furniture and cubicles in USAID offices in Ukraine, West Africa, and Mozambique, the last of which filled spaces with $250,000 worth of Herman Miller chairs. And there was more upsetting findings from DOGE. According to them, millions of dollars in federal unemployment benefits have been paid out to people who haven't even been born yet. Labor Secretary Lori Chavez Duremer told the president, unemployment insurance fraud, that trust needs to be whole for the American people. When we need it for those who deserve it. That's not what we're seeing in the numbers we saw last night. Again, exposed by our partners at DOGE at the Department of Labor. Since 2020, over $400 million of payments have gone out already. And when you hear these numbers, apparently in the United States, we have almost 25,000 who are over 115 years old who are collecting $59 million that we have sent out to people. Talk about fraudulent behavior, Mr. President. 28,000 people between 1 and 5 years old have collected fraudulent payments at the tune of $254 million has gone out. And lastly, 10,000 who have not been born yet, 15 years into the future. $69 million, and they haven't even been born yet. In one case, they will be born 129 years from now. The United States sent them $41,000, and they're not born yet. So under the Department of Labor, those are the things we're uncovering. I couldn't be more honored to tell the American people that we're bringing back their dollars, and we're serving them, returning them to the United States Treasury. In a piece of local news on Tuesday, New York City's Mayor Eric Adams reversed a decade-long sanctuary policy by allowing ICE to resume operations at Rikers Island to target criminal gangs and drug trafficking. ICE had previously had a presence on the island along with other federal law enforcement agencies, and Rikers frequently transferred illegal immigrants into federal custody for deportation. But ICE was evicted from the jail in 2014 by the city's sanctuary city law that prohibited any cooperation between the prison and federal law enforcement when it came to deporting criminal aliens. According to ABC, the new executive order now authorizes ICE's Homeland Security Investigations Division to establish an office at Rikers in order to collaborate on targeting violent criminals, gangs, and drug trafficking. The order reads, "It is critical that federal law enforcement agencies are able to share intelligence with the Department of Corrections and NYPD in real time about criminal gang activity among individuals both inside and outside of DOC custody." The order also offers space to other federal agencies, including the FBI, ATF, DEA, and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. From good news for New Yorkers to some tragic news. The Associated Press reported that 6 people were killed on Thursday when a Bell 206 helicopter fell from the sky and crashed into the Hudson River in New York City. A video posted to social media showed the chopper falling into the water after it appeared to lose its propellers midair. The helicopter had departed from downtown New York and was in the air for around 15 minutes before it crashed into the Hudson. Witnesses told the New York Post that the helicopter split in half in the air before crashing into the water near Pier 40 on West Hudson Street. There was 1 pilot and 5 passengers on board. According to NBC4 New York, the passengers were 3 children, a man, and a woman. Law enforcement told ABC News that the passengers were a family from Spain. One witness told ABC News that she, quote, heard 5 or 6 loud noises that sounded almost like gunshots in the sky and saw pieces fall off, then watched it fall into the river. Another witness said he heard something that sounded like a sonic boom before seeing the helicopter splitting in two with the rotor flying off. Let's follow that tragic story with a fantastic one. On Friday, an immigration judge ruled that Mahmoud Khalil, who was detained over his actions in leading an anti-Israel protest at Columbia University, where he openly supported terrorism in violation of his legal visa status, can be deported, giving him until April 23rd to appeal the decision. This is the correct ruling, as I've covered previously. Non-citizens do not have the same legal rights to free speech that U.S. citizens do, and supporting a terrorist group or encouraging other people to support terrorist groups is spelled out in the Immigration Act as forbidden for immigrants on a national security grounds. I may be stuck with my fellow Americans who stir up violence against my Jewish neighbors and friends, but I am not obligated to import more of you. So, hasta la vista, Khalil. Don't let the big door hit you where the good Lord split you, dude. Unfortunately, there was some more sad news this week to cover. Actor Eric Dane, who is best known for his roles on Grey's Anatomy and Euphoria, announced this week that he has ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. The 52-year-old told People magazine in an interview that I've been diagnosed with ALS. I'm grateful to have my loving family by my side as we navigate this next chapter. I feel fortunate that I'm able to continue working, and I'm looking forward to returning to the set of Euphoria next week. I kindly ask that you give my family and I privacy during this time. What can you say in response to a diagnosis like that and the future life that we know it will bring? All I can say is that I'm truly sorry that this happened to you and your family. Let's end with one more story from DOGE. According to an initial survey, they have discovered that 3 Democrat-led states account for the vast majority of the unemployment fraud in the country. Together, California, New York, and Massachusetts account for nearly 80% of the improper unemployment benefits that have been handed out since 2020. Those fraudulent payments that DOGE found total in excess of $382 million. The DOGE audit found that 24,500 people over the age of 115 years old claimed $59 million in benefits. 28,000 people between the ages of 1 and 5 years old claimed $254 million in benefits. and 9.7 thousand people with birth dates that are at least 15 years into the future claimed $69 million in benefits. In one case, someone with a birth date in the year 2154 claimed $41,000. According to DOGE, California, New York, and Massachusetts accounted for most of these improper claims, which totaled $305 million in unemployment benefits that our tax dollars were used for. Even more shockingly, California accounted for 68% of unemployment benefits that were paid to parolees on terrorist watch lists or with criminal records. As Luke Rosiak wrote for the Daily Wire, a lot of this fraud goes on in disability payments as well as unemployment because dozens of administrative judges grant disability payments to almost everyone who appears before them, overriding Social Security staff who had determined that the people were not entitled to disability payments. One of the Social Security Administrator's judges, Jennifer M. Horn, who leads the San Francisco office, ruled in every case she heard last year that the claimant should be granted disability payments, even though in each case 2 previous examinations had found that the claimant should be denied. Ronald Herman, who heard cases outside of Detroit, greenlit payments in 95% of the 1,268 cases he heard. Jan Leviter in Queens and Detroit approved 94% of 2,159 cases, potentially amounting to hundreds of millions of dollars. Such rulings have steered billions of dollars in payments to people who may not deserve them, adding to the impression that disability is being abused as a shadow welfare program. Quote, "It's all a political bent," a lawyer who represents disability seekers at the hearings told the Daily Wire. "I don't think there's any real lawyering to it. The game is to get as many hearings as I can because 50% are getting approved no matter what if I just show up. I've had people with cancer not get approved, and people with skin rashes get approved. I can't predict it anymore." One Washington, D.C. judge, who is a Bernie Sanders supporter, was overheard complaining that many of his peers viewed their job as a way to steer government checks to minorities, regardless of the facts. Social Security runs 2 disability programs, one called Social Security Disability Insurance, which is for people who have worked in the past and now find themselves unable to work, and it pays roughly $150 billion a year in benefits. The other is called Supplemental Security Income, and it is for people who have never worked. It paid out $54 billion in the year 2023. In some Appalachian counties, more than a quarter of the population was on disability. In inner cities, unemployed individuals have often feigned mental conditions like depression in order to get government checks, which last for a lot longer than welfare does. Welfare is limited to 5 years. The way the system works is that Social Security staff determines whether someone is entitled to disability benefits. And then the claimant can appeal to staff for a redetermination if they are rejected. If that panel also concludes that they are not disabled, they can appeal again to an administrative law judge. Outcomes in those proceedings largely depend on which judge the applicant gets. Even though one might assume that they would defer to the Social Security experts, 85 judges overturned Social Security rulings that a person was not disabled more than 80% of the time. Far fewer judges erred on the side of the taxpayer. Only 16 judges upheld the staff's determination more than 80% of the time, according to the 2024 data. Administrative law judges, ALJs, are not members of the judicial branch. They are executive branch employees who are represented by a union for judges, the Association of Administrative Law Judges. The AALJ's leaders were among the most activist judges in power. Its president, Samedi Ramrump approved 94% of the cases she heard in New York. Its secretary, Kimberly Shiro, ranked 49th among the 1,220 judges, approving 85% of her cases. And its treasurer, Jo Erin O'Leary, overrode staff to approve payments 3/4 of the time. The AALJ sued DOGE for accessing federal employee records, with Ramrump filing an affidavit that said, members of AALJ and I also fear that DOGE could improperly disclose records to retaliate against us. She did not return a request for comment. Disability judges with astronomically high approval ratings in 2024 include Margot Stone of Fayetteville, North Carolina, who approved 92% of the 2007 cases she heard. Gloria W. Green of Florida, North Carolina, and South Carolina approved 92% of the 1,971 cases she heard. Jeffrey Hatfield of Honolulu approved 91% of the 2,173 cases he heard. D.B. Stanley of Mobile approved 91% of 1,277 cases. Matthew Malfa of Manchester approved 91% of 1,608 cases. Randall D. Higgins of Charlotte and Tampa approved 91% of 1,910 cases. And William Wallace of St. Louis approved 91% of 2,170 cases. These judges could also not be reached for comment. Back in 2013, then Senator Tom Coburn of Oklahoma noted that administrative law judges' hearings were one-sided affairs where applicants pled their case without anyone representing the taxpayer. He said, quote, "One simple reform that would make a big difference is including a professional from the Social Security Administration to represent the government and ultimately the American taxpayer in decisions made by ALJs. Some claimant attorneys withhold evidence from the judge. About 10% of an employee's pay is directed to Social Security retirement funds and another 2% to its disability fund. According to the 2024 Annual Trustee Report, Social Security is projected to be depleted of funding in 8 years and will then be unable to pay full retirement benefits beginning in 2033 for many Americans. Terminating disability judges with abnormal records or eliminating the 1,200 judge appeal layer entirely could cut down on dubious disability and allow more resources to be shifted to the retirement side. Something worth considering. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please help build this podcast into a success by clicking like and follow, and I hope you come back again next week. There will only be the Maine weekend episode next week, but there are plenty of places to get the headlines from. Until then, have a good week, my friends.